Let me tell you something about the day my entire understanding of galactic warfare collapsed like a cheap tent in a solar storm. My name is Vreth Kallos, Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Dominari Collective. I had 17 years of field experience, 4 commendations, and an ego the size of a neutron star. I say had because after what happened on the station known as Relay Point Orvax, the ego did not survive. None of us really expected it to. The briefing had been simple enough. Laughably simple, actually. A human security detachment, 43 personnel, was guarding a mid-sized cargo relay station in neutral space. Standard corporate protection contract. Nothing special, nothing alarming. Our strike force numbered 280 Dominari shock troops, elite, battle-tested, equipped with the finest kinetic suppression armor the collective could manufacture. Our commander, War Captain Dhorrak Penn, had looked at the pre-mission intelligence, made a sound somewhere between a chuckle and a growl, and said, and I quote, "This will be over before my breakfast digests." Dhorrak was a large male. He ate large breakfasts. So statistically we had time. We were wrong. The first sign that something was unusual came approximately 4 seconds after our forward unit breached the station's primary airlock. Sensor specialist Yuva Tress, a sharp-eyed female with reflexes faster than most species could blink, stopped moving. Just stopped. Her hand shot up in the halting signal. "Commander," she said quietly over the comm channel, "I am reading 43 human life signs. All of them are moving. All of them are moving toward us." Dhorrak actually laughed out loud. "Over an open channel. Good," he said. "Saves us the trouble of hunting them. Now, I want you to understand something about Dominari tactical doctrine. Our entire battlefield philosophy is built around the principle of overwhelming psychological pressure. You hit fast, you hit loud, you make the enemy feel like the walls themselves are angry. Most species, upon seeing 280 armored soldiers pouring through their airlock, do one of 2 things. They either surrender, or they run. It is a perfectly logical response to an objectively terrible situation. The humans did neither. What the humans did was turn off the lights. The entire station went dark in under a second. Not emergency dim. Not the amber glow of backup systems. Black, complete and total blackness so thick it felt like it had weight. Our optical sensors scrambled immediately, flooded by a rotating frequency pulse that Yuva later described as aggressively rude. Then, the noise started. Not screaming. Stop pretend. Not warning shots. Not the polite sound of an enemy preparing to negotiate. Something far worse. From somewhere in that darkness came a slow, deliberate rhythm, boots on metal grating, 43 pairs, moving together. In unison. Like a single enormous creature with 43 hearts and one very bad intention. Troop Sergeant Baxen Ovrul, a warrior I had personally seen headbutt a pressurized blast door and walk away smiling, leaned toward me in the dark and whispered, "Why are they walking that slowly?" It was not a question. It was the kind of statement a creature makes when it already suspects the answer and does not particularly want to hear it. The answer came in the form of a voice. One voice. Calm, unhurried. A human male. From the sound of it, though, in my experience, human voices carry a certain quality that is difficult to categorize. Not threatening. Exactly. More like the sound of someone who has already decided how the conversation ends and is simply being polite about the opening remarks. Relay Point Orvax Security Lead, Sergeant First Class Doman Vrek speaking. You have entered a privately contracted facility under active security protocol. You are trespassing. You are also. And here there was a pause so brief and so deliberate that my threat assessment module actually flagged it as a hostile action, outnumbered. Dhorrak's laughter this time was shorter, less certain. Outnumbered, he repeated. His translator must have confirmed the word 3 times because he said it like he was tasting something unfamiliar. There are 43 of you, correct, said the human named Doman Vrek. There are 280 of us, also correct. A silence stretched between those 2 facts like a wire pulled just a little too tight. Then how? Dhorrak said. And I could hear the first hairline crack forming somewhere in his composure. Are you outnumbered in your favor? Because, War Captain, said Doman Vrek, and his voice did not rise even a fraction of a degree. You brought soldiers. I brought people who have been doing this since before your species discovered metallurgy. So you have numbers. We have experience with numbers like yours. Baxen Ovrul made a sound next to me that I can only describe as involuntary. Then the lights came back on, and every single human was already exactly where they needed to be, 43 of them, positioned at every choke point, every corridor junction, every elevation advantage the station offered. They had moved through the darkness in complete silence, in the time it took Dhorrak to have that conversation, and assembled into a tactical formation so efficient it looked less like a defensive setup and more like a proof of concept. A proof that said very clearly, in the universal language of applied geometry and bad intentions, we have done this before, many times. Against things much scarier than you. Dhorrak looked at his forward units. He looked at the humans. He looked at his tactical display, which was now showing 43 blue markers sitting directly on top of every significant point on the station's layout. "Yuva," he said quietly. "Sir, recalculate our operational projections." Yuva was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, 3 very long seconds. "Sir," she said, "I would recommend we begin with the assumption that our projections were structurally speaking optimistic. From somewhere ahead of us, in a corridor lined with humans who had not moved a single unnecessary muscle, I heard one of them say something to another in a low voice. A short phrase, easy and relaxed, like 2 workers commenting on the weather before a shift. The translator caught it half a second later. It said, "Told you they would do the light speech." And then one of them, I still do not know which one, laughed. "I want to be very clear about something. I, Vreth Kallos, Senior Intelligence Analyst of the Dominari Collective, have written 14 official combat assessment reports in my career. I have documented the fall of the Vikari siege lines. I personally filed the report on the Battle of Threshold 9, where our forces dismantled a fully fortified Krellian defense network in under 6 hours. 14 reports. All of them contained the phrase, Dominari forces performed as projected. The report I wrote after Relay Point Orvax did not contain that phrase. What it contained instead was a great deal of very careful language designed to explain, to superior officers who had not been present, how 280 of the finest shock troops in the collective had been systematically, methodically, and almost cheerfully taken apart by 43 humans in a cargo station. I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the corridor. The moment Dhorrak gave the order to advance, Sergeant First Class Doman Vrek did something that none of our tactical models had predicted. He gave his own order. One word. Short. Flat. The translator rendered it simply as, "Work." That was it. No battle cry. No dramatic declaration. Just, work. Like it was a task on a list. Like dismantling a Dominari strike force was something you scheduled between a meal break and a maintenance check. What followed was not a battle in any sense I had previously understood the word. Our forward unit, 12 soldiers, moved into the first corridor. Standard wedge formation. Armor locked, weapons hot. Textbook opening. They made it approximately 9 meters before the corridor itself seemed to become hostile. Panel sections they had walked past without concern suddenly became problems. Elevation angles that had looked clear were not. The humans did not fight like warriors defending a position. They fought like people who had personally designed the position to be a problem and were now simply activating it. Troop Sergeant Baxen Ovrul pushed forward on the left flank with his unit and walked directly into what I can only describe as a human who appeared to have no concept of personal risk. A large one. Broad across the shoulders, calm in the face, moving with the kind of unhurried efficiency that suggested the word danger had been surgically removed from his vocabulary at some point in his youth. Baxen was a decorated veteran. He had fought on 6 different worlds. He outweighed this human by a significant margin. The human put him on the floor in 4 seconds, not through any exotic weapon or technological advantage, through the application of leverage, timing, and what our medical analyst later described as a concerning familiarity with how load-bearing joints prefer not to be loaded. The Baxen, to his considerable credit, got back up. He looked at the human looked at him, and then the human said in a tone so conversational it was almost insulting, "You want to try that again or are we done?" Baxen later told me it was the calmness that got him, not the technique, not the pain. The calmness, the total, absolute absence of adrenaline in that human's voice, like the concept of a 280-unit Dominari strike force had been processed, categorized and filed somewhere under things that are fine. Meanwhile, Dhorrak was receiving reports from every unit simultaneously, and none of them were good. Right corridor pinned down. Left corridor 3 soldiers separated from the group and being handled individually by 2 humans who apparently preferred working in pairs. Central approach compromised by a smoke dispersal system that Yuva confirmed was, and she used this exact phrase, definitely not standard station equipment and definitely was installed specifically for us. They had prepared, that was the thing. That was the detail that kept surfacing in every report, in every sector like a repeating variable in an equation that always resolved to the same answer. The humans had looked at this station, identified every approach, every choke point, every environmental factor, and had spent their preparation time not on fortifying a perimeter, but on turning the entire station into an extension of themselves. They were not defending a location. They were operating inside a tool they had built. Dhorrak called for a consolidated push. All remaining units center mass, overwhelming force. The old reliable. The thing that had always worked before. He called it with full confidence, because when everything else fails, numbers remain numbers. Doman Vrek let them get 2/3 of the way down the central corridor. Then he turned the gravity compensators off. Not all of them. Not the ones in the human positions. Just the ones in the corridor where 190 Dominari soldiers were currently mid-stride. What happened next? Lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds of absolute bedlam as nearly 200 armored soldiers discovered, simultaneously, that their center of mass had very different opinions about which direction was down. Equipment scattered. Formation collapsed. The corridor became a confusion of armor and limbs and some genuinely impressive cursing in 4 different Dominari dialects. And through all of it, from the far end of that corridor, I heard Doman Vrek's voice again, still calm, still unhurried. 43, he said. That is how many people it takes when each one of them is worth the math. Dhorrak called the retreat 11 seconds after that. Possibly the fastest command decision he had ever made in his career. We pulled back through the airlock in what I will generously describe as an organized withdrawal, and what Ovrul would later describe in her own report as a collectively rapid change of opinion. As the airlock sealed behind the last of our soldiers, I looked back through the viewport. Doman Vrek was standing in the corridor. He had his arms crossed. He was watching us leave with the expression of someone who had expected exactly this outcome from the first moment we arrived. One of his people said something to him. He replied, short, simple. The translator caught it just before the viewport sealed. He said, log it, same as the last ones. I sat down in the extraction craft and began composing my report. I stared at the opening line for a long time. The line that had always read, Dominari forces performed as projected. I deleted it 4 times. Eventually I wrote something that I believe was more accurate. Something that I think should in hindsight have been written into our pre-mission briefing before any of this began. It said, do not engage human security personnel on a station they have had more than 24 hours to prepare. Possibly do not engage them at all. Further study recommended. Significant further study. I submitted the report. My commander read it. He called me into his office and asked me one question. How many of them did it take to stop us? 43, sir. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, slowly and with the weight of a professional reassessing everything he thought he knew. Get me everything we have on human security training programs. Everything. Start from the beginning. I nodded and walked out. Behind me I heard him say one more thing. Quietly. To no one in particular. 43. Like if he said it enough times, it would start to make sense. It did not. It still does not. And I have a feeling deep in whatever passes for instinct in a species that prides itself on logic that it never will.